this week, but I actually put a title on my sermon, and I'm calling it a Pandemic Election Peace Buffet. And attempting to make this the title much longer, because besides being in a pandemic and an election, the list of disasters keeps going on, right? So, as in case we needed the reminder that one point around here, the sky was obscured by the smoke from the West Coast. Ruth Bader Ginsburg died this week. And then there's the sharing this morning, and right, so could have been a very long title to this sermon. And instead of trying to figure out, one answer to what peace means at a time like this, I designed this service as a sort of a buffet. A buffet is just like a spread of food, but it's usually around a theme. So the theme this morning was peace, and trying to figure out, what does it mean to celebrate peace now? What does it mean to even talk about peace? And also, what resources do we have for this time? And so last week, Reverend Akojaram talked about the power of the gospel. And so I also want to flesh that out a bit this week and talk about what is the power of the gospel in this particular very strange time that we're living in. So the buffet was the whole service. And all I'm going to do now is just walk us back through the service and notice what it is we sang and what it is we heard and what it is we presented as resources for moving particular. So the first song we sang was a song of hope. Right? We shall walk through the valley of the shadow of death, which doesn't sound very hopeful, right? But it's a recognition that for thousands of years, God's people have recognized that, yes, part of life is walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Not all of life is that way, but that happens. That happens regularly to good people and to bad people and the rest of us who are sort of somewhere in between. So this image comes to us, of course, from Psalm 23, but continues on throughout history. But the song also recognizes that as Christians, we walk through the valley with Jesus as our leader, right? So Jesus as our leader tells us that this is how we walk through the valley. Jesus is the way, right? And just because Jesus is our leader doesn't mean we get to walk around the valley. We actually have to walk through it just like everybody else and with everybody else. But we have a way. We have Jesus as our leader, so we have a sense of how we go through that valley. Then the next thing we did in the service is we had work of the community, and that reminds us that we have things to do. Right? Even if you're just sitting in your house all week long, right, or in your room all week long, there are things that you can be doing. Right? And it's also a reminder that we have each other, that it's the work of the community, that we do these things together. So it's not just like you all by yourself, and because it's so hard, like sitting in your house all by yourself, and well, it really doesn't feel like there's so much that I can do. But if I realize that all these other people are doing it too, right, then, and with me, and right, we do this together, we feel a little less hopeless in whatever the situation is that we're trying to respond to. The next thing we did is we read Matthew chapter 18, this passage about dealing with conflict in the church. And to recognize that, yes, we deal with conflict in the church. We don't avoid conflict, and we aren't somehow like, no, it happens. We have conflict in the church, and we choose to deal with it. So Matthew 18 gives us this way. First, we do it one-on-one, just to keep it small and contained. And if that doesn't work, we add a few more people. And if that doesn't work, right, we bring the whole church. And if that doesn't work, we treat people like Pharisees and tax collectors, which somebody chuckled at, I noticed. probably somebody who was a tax collector. I don't know how many tax collectors we have in church. Right? But treating someone like a Pharisee and a tax collector, of course, means to continually invite them back into community, because that's what we do with Pharisees and tax collectors, is we invite them back into community. Matthew 18 continues then, and it also grants us power. Jesus says, you have the power to bind and to loose. Now, historically, this has been misunderstood to say, well, we have the power to kick people out. Hooray, we can kick people out of church if we don't like them. But that's not actually what binding and loosing is about. Binding and loosing is about the community deciding acceptable and unacceptable forms of behavior. It's deciding what is the law for us and what isn't the law for us. Right? So this means that as a community, we are given the authority to say no. To say, no, we don't act that way. No, we don't do things like that, right? It gives us the power of non-cooperation. Right? That even if the government says this is what we're going to be doing, we can say no, because we, as a community, are given that authority. So that's another resource we have going forward. And no, the word no is a huge resource. Right? We are given that authority. We can say no. Rachel introduced us to a couple of other resources on this idea of tikkun olam, right? This righteousness for everybody, that we can all do something, and everybody has that obligation to work toward righteousness and justice and fairness in the world. And she talked also about the heroes of the present, that Ruth Bader Ginsburg and other people, right? We don't have to go back 2,000 years or right back to the good old days when we had the great heroes of old, but that the heroes are still around us now. And when we're feeling discouraged and like we can't make a difference, we can tell stories about people today who are making a difference. And so we can say, yeah, we can still make a difference today. Then we sang of comfort. And if you were a little worried that we were starting to sing Advent songs a bit early, well, here we go, right? Comfort, comfort, ye my people, speak of peace, thus says our God. Comfort those who sit in darkness. Lots of people today sitting in darkness. And yet, right? And so we have this task of just bringing comfort to people. Sometimes we can't fix the problem. Sometimes there's the problems that are too big to be, and we can't just walk in there and fix it, right? But at least we can bring comfort. The song continues, speak to Jerusalem of the peace that waits for them, right? Tell them that their warfare now is over. It tells us that our goals are not just to fix things in the church, but they're also national and political. Warfare now is over. Right? So it's and this can be personal, but it also can be wider. And we have a task that doesn't just stop at the edges of the church or at the edges of the personal, at the edges of the individual. But we have a task to create society. All this coming from the comfort that we find in being part of the body of believers. The passage that just got read was actually the Rosh Hashanah passage, right? So if you didn't know, it's actually Jewish New Year right now. It's complicated because of the calendar. But I wanted to read this passage, first of all, because it is Jewish New Year. So if you have Jewish friends and neighbors, you might wish them, right, Happy Rosh Hashanah or something like that. Shana Tov might work, but that might not work for you. And so then it goes on to explain a ritual for what you're supposed to do for the Jewish New Year. And of course, it involves food. But it tells us another resource we have, and that is the basic resource of ritual. And one of these weeks, we're going to get around to spending a whole Sunday just talking about rituals for the home, because you're sort of stuck, like we aren't doing communion these days, and the ritual of coming to church, you're not coming to church, But there are many things that we can do in our homes that become part of the ritual, and that become part of our lives and give us strength for this time. Right? And they are usually physical things, right? That things that even if you're just sitting in your chair doing them, you're doing something, because part of our faith is the way our bodies move and the way our bodies act. So these little rituals that bind us together as people, that bind us closer to God, and that just provide a structure for our day and for our week. These are, or for our year, right? These are important things. The Rosh Hashanah ritual is also centered around sharing food, right? It's centered around bringing people together, roasting a lamb, and just sitting around and eating. It's a time of remembering who you are, remembering the mighty acts of God in the past, and the things that the people of God have survived. That if we look back through church history or through Jewish history or through the history, right, of any religious group, we find that it hasn't all been a picnic, that the church has gone through horrible, horrible things in the past. Unfortunately, the church has also done horrible, horrible things in the past. We don't want to do those, right? It's part of the reason that we, right, some of you at least study history, is because there's stuff that we did as human beings in the past. We don't want to do those anymore, right? But, right, horrible things have happened. We have survived. Right? Rabbi Joe a few weeks ago said that basically all Jewish ritual is the same. It's like they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat, right? We have survived, right? And we celebrate the fact that we have survived and we can continue to survive. Verse 11 also says, this is how you shall eat it, with your loins girded. You got to say it that way, right? This whole tucking your stuff in, right? Let's just call it loins girded because that's fun to say. And your sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand, you shall eat it hurriedly. It is a Passover to the Lord, right? The idea here is sort of exactly the opposite of the idea of my home, my castle. Right? My home, my castle says, this is my home and I'm going to be here and I'm going to defend it. And I'm going to sort of, hurt anybody who comes to take my stuff. And, right, Rosh Hashanah reminds us that, no, that's not how we're supposed to understand the world. We're supposed to always be ready to go. This is not my castle. This is a temporary place. My stuff is here. Stuff is just stuff. Right? And if God calls me to get up and move, well, guess we'll get up and move, right? It's just a house, it's just a roof. There'll be a roof somewhere else, right? Or maybe a tent for the next 40 years. Who knows? God will take care of us, right? Life is a gift. Possessions are temporary. So this is how we celebrate the present. So then we had this sermon, and it's going to keep going for a while, but I'm almost done. And our last song is going to be God is working his or her purpose out. Right? And the melody of the song is this steady, plodding sort of thing. Do, 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 do. Right? It's this idea that we're just going to keep going. And there's days when that's hard to do. Right? But even just the melody itself reminds us that we are going to continue moving onward together as a community, but we're going to continue moving. And the song is in a minor key. And a minor key, right, is the music of mystery, right? Because sometimes we don't know how we're going to continue. Sometimes we get into a situation and I go, I have no idea how I'm going to move forward. I have no idea what's coming. Right? But that's the power of the gospel. The power of the gospel is found inside the mystery of we don't know how we're going to move forward, and yet somehow we will, right? And one of the lines we're going to sing is, fight we the fight with sorrow and sin to set the captives free, right? That there's a purpose, there's a task we have been given to set the captives free. an ongoing reality with our, with our overfull prison system in this country, setting the captives free, right? Setting the immigrant captives free, setting the full jails captives free, still a reality. So there's lots of tasks out there. We all know this. So all of these things that have been part of our worship service this morning are our resources. They are given to us by God for survival, but even more than that, to allow us to prosper. That part of the goal of all of this is joy. And yes, sometimes it's hard, right? Especially these days, to think that at the end of this, there is going to be joy, right? But that's part of the task, is to remember that the goal of this is not just sort of bare survival, or not just hunkering down and we're going to tough this one out. No, we're going to get to joy. That's what we're aiming at. So that's the buffet. That's all of this stuff spread out before you, right? These messages from God and from hymn writers of the past and from one another. It's all been spread out before you. So now we're going to go to our breakout rooms. And I just want you to talk to each other about, so what part of this buffet are you going to use this week? Right? Because that's the great thing about a buffet, is you don't have to eat like everything that's put in front of you. You can go, I'll take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and one of those, or maybe I'm just going to keep eating these desserts and I'm just going to ignore the rest of the buffet. And we can do that with a buffet. It's cool, right? So that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to go into our breakout rooms and you're going to talk to each other about what parts of the buffet you're going to find useful this week. Or maybe there's other stuff you're going to bring and it's going to become more of a potluck. We'll see how it goes. So Philip, if you can break us into breakout.